you so much, everybody, for having me here today. It's really exciting. Always when I can have the opportunity to share my story with students at my alma mater at UNO. Go Mavs! And everyone else who's not from UNO, welcome. Okay, so today I'm going to talk to you about follow through and really how making your focus on follow through, how you can achieve better results quicker and just kind of do more interesting, impactful things. So I wanted to start by telling you a little bit about who I am and kind of how I got here, because that really starts to lay the groundwork for letting you know a little bit about what I know about follow through. So I am currently a founder and CEO of WellCore Enterprise Yoga. It's a corporate wellness business where I go into schools and companies to work with people to help them figure out really practical ways that mindfulness and techniques from yoga can kind of help them be more productive, happier, more successful, really kind of better at work, but like better at life also. So I'm also an executive producer of the Think, Start, Do Women's Entrepreneurship Conference that Erica so graciously mentioned. So it's a conference for female entrepreneurs to really help them kind of come together, connect with people who can relate to their experiences as a female founder, and really kind of grow this community and focus on collaboration. I'm a managing partner at an art gallery here in Omaha called Pet Shop. It's in Benson, so we are an artist co-op and a gallery where we really work with creative entrepreneurs and help them kind of have an audience for their work, especially when they're just starting out. I'm a writer. I'll tell you how I was a business journalist in a past life about 10 years ago at the World Herald. As I mentioned, I'm a yoga and meditation teacher. I had the opportunity to train in India, and that's where I had my certification. And I'm also a startup strategist. I work with startups all over the world, but right now in particular with one in San Francisco called Serverless, and we make tooling for developers to work with serverless architectures. So I work with their community and their content strategy there. So, kind of how did I get here? I am an Omaha native. I graduated from UNO in the class of 2007, and my degree was actually in communications, so public relations and advertising. I was a journalism major, and during my time at UNO, I started working at the World Herald. So my interest wasn't really journalism, kind of like newspaper journalism or print journalism, but I had an opportunity at a really sort of interesting and relevant time in the business community here to be a business writer at the World Herald. And so I started writing about small businesses and about entrepreneurship and really about this entrepreneurial community that was starting to grow in Omaha. You guys are super lucky because I bet that you kind of knew the word entrepreneur from definitely when you were in high school, I would say, like maybe even when you were in junior high. 10 years ago, the sort of business landscape, especially in Omaha, was a little bit different than that. When people thought about kind of having a good career or a good job, you know, we are lucky in Omaha to have some really great large employers. You know, you think about sort of job security, and maybe you think about a company like Mutual of Omaha or Woodman of the World or Ameritrade. And so, I mean, when 10 years ago, especially, if you were talking to somebody about like starting a company or like, you know, what are you going to do after you graduate? Well, I'm going to work for myself. Like that was a little bit sort of crazier of an idea. I think people in Omaha and in the Midwest were just like a little bit more kind of risk averse at that time. So I had a great opportunity to not only sort of tap into the entrepreneurial spirit that was definitely sort of growing in Omaha and kind of the surrounding areas like in Des Moines or Kansas City, but also being able to help to kind of shape the conversation about like what it meant to be an entrepreneur and really helping people to realize that it's a viable career opportunity, that you could really kind of have this future where you created your own kind of like profession or your work life. So it was really exciting. So I spent, 3.5 years at the World Herald and really was feeling pulled towards these innovative startups that I was like writing about and that I was covering as a reporter. And so I went on to work for a startup that was called Graffiti Tracker that was based between here and California. And we worked with police departments doing really interesting work tracking and analyzing graffiti through a web-based system so that we could help police departments and cities like predict gang violence and track gang migration. So it was pretty interesting work and felt impactful and meaningful. And so at that time, I was kind of in charge of their marketing, something that we'd probably call more of like a community manager position today. And so here I was, like 26, making a ton of money, working at a super cool job, like going, getting paid to like go to South by Southwest and hang out in Austin, and go to California and like see my clients and you might hang out with my coworkers. And like, I really felt like I should have been really like excited. Like this was sort of, like the pinnacle of my career. But the reality was like I was super unhappy. I really kind of had this sense that there was something more like out there for me, but I had no idea like at all really what that was or what that meant. From the time that I was a young kid, I mean, my parents always loved to talk about like, oh man, you were like bossing the neighbor kids around and you were organizing how you guys would play and all this other stuff. And I remind them like, no, I was a natural leader from a young age. I was good at delegating responsibility and tasks and like getting people to work together to get things done. I think in like high school and college, these kind of like side hustles that I had, like cleaning or like I had a jewelry business or I was starting an in-home wine tasting business like after I graduated college and I was old enough to drink. And really, through all of those things, I was expressing this like entrepreneurial spirit, but I didn't have that word yet. Because again, we're talking about really like 10 or 15 years ago when I think the word like entrepreneur or like startup scene wasn't something that you would associate with Omaha. So I decided to leave my startup job, sell everything that I owned, and bought a one-way ticket to Australia where I had a visa to live and work for 1 year. So I ended up making my way to Australia, really sort of like working kind of odd jobs on a working holiday visa and taking the time to really decide like what did I want to do next. After I left Australia, I went to Asia and I lived in Thailand and Nepal and India. And in India, I decided to really pursue my interest in teaching yoga and exploring mindfulness and meditation. And so I spent some time living in India. I became a yoga teacher. I moved to Europe and then eventually moved back to Omaha where I thought, okay, great. Like I've been traveling for 2 years. I know that like I don't want to settle for something because I've had all these great experiences and I kind of had this idea of what that was worth. Unfortunately, the people who were the hiring managers, the jobs I was applying for, didn't see it that way. And I really like struggled after taking a couple of years out of the kind of like traditional workforce to come back and like find my place. So luckily, I had kind of made a promise to myself that if I didn't get any of these like 3 jobs that were literally the 3 only jobs that I was willing to apply for because I thought maybe they could potentially be something that like I felt good about and wanted to do, that if I didn't get those jobs that I would start a business. When I had lived in Europe, I lived in London and I had kind of planned on continuing to live in London. It's where my husband is from. And long story short, after we came back to America, it was just like the cost of living in Omaha is much less than London. And it was kind of a good place to start a home base. And then too, I realized like in London, I'd wanted to start this business, like going into offices and working with people to help them kind of learn how yoga and meditation could help them more like in their job. And I thought like, hey, I have all of these business connections in Omaha because I was a business writer here and I'm from here. And I thought like, well, why don't I just try this idea for this business in Omaha and see what happens? So lo and behold, it was a success. It was awesome. I specialize in working with a lot of computer programmers and web developers. I work with like Omaha Code School. I've worked with like Interface, so some of the other coding schools, and just like tech companies in general, because I found they were the people who really kind of understood this idea of like using mindfulness to be more productive. Okay, so that's awesome. And then I went on to, after that Think Start Do, the Women's Entrepreneurship Conference, kind of out of this desire to bring other founders together who I thought could like relate to this kind of experience. As a founder or a CEO, it can be a kind of lonely experience sometimes. There are so many like decisions that you're making all the time that you really, sometimes it just can feel like you're the only one who knows what that feels like. So bringing people together who could relate to that. And so then kind of fast forward to now. I work with people in retreats, like kind of all over the world. The next one I'm leading is in Spain, or sometimes they happen here, like on site, like at people's kind of work, or again, like at school. And I have had a lot of opportunity to just like work with other entrepreneurs and kind of learn from their experience. And the one thing that I have learned from all of these entrepreneurs is the thing that separates people who are successful from the people who have these big ideas but really can't seem to get them off the ground is the ability to follow through. Why does follow through matter? It matters because it's what separates the entrepreneurs from the entrepreneurs. The ability to set goals and actually follow through will lead to success regardless of your profession or your industry. Strengthening this skill is something that is just basically guaranteed to benefit you regardless of what you're working on. So when we think about people who follow through, and we think about kind of what characteristics they have, people who follow through, they're resilient, they're persistent, they're organized, they're self-motivated, they're disciplined, and they're intentional. So if you're looking at this list and you're thinking, man, that doesn't describe me, that's okay, because I can tell you that you can work on these characteristics to help you to be more successful in your follow-through. And today, really, the tips that I'm going to offer you about how to kind of strengthen this follow-through muscle, know that like you don't have to do every single thing on the list. Even if you can figure out a couple of these things that you're really good at to focus on, then you're already kind of like on the right path. So I want you to just decide like what resonates with you, kind of as we're talking about this today. So the very first step to following through is you have to know where you're going. So to know where you're going, it's really important to start out by having a clear vision and goals. So, I mean, has anybody here, raise your hand, do you know what vision is, or do you know what a vision is? Anybody? Sure. So maybe like on company websites, sometimes you see like they have a vision statement like on their website or with teams. And so when you think about a vision, it's really sort of like your big picture, longer term goals. So it's really important when you're thinking about a vision to not limit yourself in this possibility. I think this is really something that a lot of us kind of tend to do, is like you have this big idea, and before you even sort of think about like breaking it down or like how can you follow through, you're like, you know what, like that's too big, that's too crazy, like I'll never be able to do that. So the first step is really allowing yourself to have this grand vision. So we are going to do a quick sort of vision exercise. So I'm going to ask you to just like stand up for a second. Thank you. Okay. So we're going to stand up, and then I just want you standing up to just close your eyes. So we're going to keep our eyes closed for just a moment. We're going to stand just in our place. And I want you to just take a second, just take a deep breath. So just like take a couple deep breaths. You can breathe in through your nose, you can breathe out through your nose, or you can breathe out through your mouth, but just kind of take a couple deep breaths. So keep your eyes closed, and I want you to just kind of relax the muscles in your face. So just relax. Maybe we're kind of scanning your awareness from the top of your head all the way down to your toes, and just like notice if there's any place in your body that feels tight or where you're feeling tense, and just use your breath. Focus on using the exhale. So like imagine that every time you're breathing out, your body is just like feeling a little bit more relaxed. So the muscles in your face are relaxed, your eyelids are heavy. You're just standing, so just bring your awareness to your feet. So keep your eyes closed, but you can just feel both of your feet just kind of firmly planted on the floor. All right, so keep your eyes closed, and we're just gonna spend a second daydreaming here. So I want you to start thinking about 10 years from now. So start to imagine your life 10 years from now? So again, without limitations, without boundaries, we're not trying to think about like what is or isn't practical right now. Just think, if there are no limitations, if there are no boundaries, what would like a perfect day look like for you in 10 years? So maybe thinking about like, where are you at, your physical surroundings, thinking about who are you with, thinking about like, how are you spending your day? Maybe you're hanging out on the beach. Maybe you're running your business. Maybe you're running your business while hanging out on the beach. And I want you to start to imagine the details. So like, what does your outfit look like? What are you wearing? What are you having for lunch? What do you smell? So really just think about the details. Thank you for the music, that was unplanned. Okay, so as you're keeping your eyes closed for just another moment here, and we're thinking about this kind of like perfect life or this best life 10 years from now, think about how you feel. Like, how does that make you feel? Like, are you happy? Are you satisfied? Are you fulfilled? Okay, keep your eyes closed for just another second and just kind of take a deep breath, maybe exhaling through the mouth if it feels good. All right, so you can open your eyes. Thank you for being good sports. You can have a seat. So when we think about starting to set our goals and setting our goals from our vision, you can use that vision that you imagined there as kind of the basis for starting your 10-year goals. So when we think about setting goals and being clear about your goals and your objectives, there are a couple things you want to think about with that process. You want to make sure that you're being concise. You want to make sure that there's a deadline. So in this case, we're saying, all right, 10 years is our deadline. And then we're starting from that kind of like farther out goal, and you're reverse engineering it. So you're breaking it down. So based on your 10-year goal, then you're saying, okay, if this is where you want to be in 10 years, then this is where you need to be at the halfway point, using that to start, set your 5-year goals, and then working backwards to 1-year goals, all the way to 1 month, to 1 week, to 1 day. So thinking about kind of reverse engineering it and breaking it down really based on your desired objectives in the future. And then also, there are all kinds of really awesome frameworks. So one that I am using right now for setting goals, it's called OKRs. It's Objective and Key Results. If you are at all interested, I encourage you to Google it. Like, if you have any interest at all in setting goals and are looking for a little bit of guidance, OKRs are a pretty simple framework and one that I found pretty effective to be working with. So you've started with this 10-year goal, you've worked backwards, you're really clear on where you're headed, and you have this idea. And so that's our first step, figuring out where we're going. So your second step, after you know where you're going, is figuring out how you're going to get organized and how you can stay accountable. So the first thing with organization and goals, I would definitely say, is thinking about deadlines. So, really, my #1 tool for follow through is a calendar. So whether it's like your Google Calendar, which I definitely have like 5 of, or, like my planner too. So sometimes it's like helpful to be like writing it out physically, but figuring out like, how much can you accomplish and in what time frame, and then actually writing it down so that you have some sort of accountability. And then 2, thinking about, like what other kind of support you might need as far as accountability. You can definitely, call on a friend. So maybe you have like an accountability partner or like an accountability group. It could be literally just like a group text message, or just like a text message that you have a weekly check-in with somebody, or even like a Google Hangout or any kind of, like messaging app, or it could be over email, or maybe it's something where you have a virtual meeting. You even could think about having sort of like virtual work time where literally you're just like hanging out with somebody else on Skype while you're both like working on your project. So thinking about, like what kind of other support you might need to help be accountable, and thinking about too, really sticking to that schedule. Another key kind of tip that I would share about accountability is when you're sharing your goals with people, or you're kind of like sharing your progress, or you're sharing your intention with this, it can really help people to kind of like cheer you on, and even like checking in and like asking about your progress. And then too, I think that just when you say something out loud, it's like, oh man, okay, so like I've said it, I guess I should do it now. So think about those kind of ways that you can help to be more accountable in this process. So then, really very much related to accountability, don't be afraid to ask for help and support from others. I think especially for people who consider themselves to be really strong leaders, or, you know, if you're the kind of person who feels like you have all the answers, I can relate. So sometimes it can feel like kind of a struggle to ask for people's help, or even like sometimes, you know, I have this sense like, oh man, and the time it will take to explain what I need and ask, like I could just do it myself. But like that isn't always really the most like productive way to do things. So thinking about what kind of help and support you need, when I was really kind of reflecting on, you know, like what's like the best advice that people have offered to me about being an entrepreneur, that I've really found to be true, it's building a strong support system and realizing, you know, that even if as an entrepreneur you're sort of like the face of things, there are so many other people who can help and support your progress. So don't be afraid to ask them. And really, when you're building that support network, it's important to fill it with people, at least some people who are going to be supporting you sort of regardless, because there are definitely times in your entrepreneurial journey where things just feel too hard, you know, where you feel like, man, I don't see how I'm going to get past this. So like in those moments when you have those cheerleaders who sometimes really are like picking you up off of the floor, to tell you like, it's okay, we can do this. That really can just be like a crucial sort of turning point, and really the difference between feeling like you can continue or not. So thinking about that support system, what that looks like, and once you have it established, not being afraid to call on it. You know, I think sometimes we're just, you know, worried that we're like imposing on somebody else, but I think like you'll find, especially as you're building this sort of like authentic support system, those people really genuinely want you to succeed. You know, asking for help and support from others, which sometimes can make you feel a little bit vulnerable. Really just remembering to be compassionate with yourself and compassionate with the process ultimately. I think especially if you're driven, if you're a perfectionist, if you're very results oriented, sometimes we really can be hard on ourselves thinking like, oh man, like I'm failing, or like I'm not as far as I would like to be, or things like that. So just like allowing yourself to be compassionate with yourself, and be kind of patient with the process, and know that it may not be happening overnight, and that's okay. So the next step is really making sure that you're checking in regularly and making adjustments where needed. I think especially sometimes if you're a very sort of goals-oriented person, or like even somebody who's like very decisive, and so you have this really sort of concrete idea of where you think you're going and exactly how you're going to get there. That's awesome, and that's a great starting point, but the reality is there are lots of other sort of factors that are involved that can kind of make it necessary to really like redirect or think about another approach. So, I mean, back when we were talking about characteristics of people who follow through, one of the main characteristics I would say is resilience, like the ability to be resilient, the ability to recognize when, you know, this course isn't working. And so instead of walking away and thinking, okay, like it's over, I failed, like, or that was the only way to do it, being a little bit more open-minded and realizing, you know, like it's totally fine to kind of optimize for the results that you're looking for. So you need to check in regularly so that you can assess kind of where you are with the progress. And I mean, be realistic with your check-ins, and also know that it isn't like the be all and end all. Like, I mean, if you notice that like you're behind, okay, like not a big deal. Again, we just like adjust and figure out the best course for moving forward. So really being flexible with your process while staying committed to your desired results. So going back to that first step that we talked about, being really clear on your vision, on your goals. When you're really clear on where you're going, then it makes it a little bit easier to be able to adjust, as long as you're just focusing on those end results. So really, the last tip I would say is probably one of the most important. Allowing yourself to celebrate along the way. Again, like when we're results oriented, when we're just like super committed to the process, head down, just like hustling, it's sometimes, you know, easy to get like so caught up in that process that we're not allowing ourselves to celebrate or feel excited about it until we've like reached maybe this 10-year goal. And it's like, okay, like that's awesome, but you know, like how are you going to sustain yourself over the sort of like 10 years in between now and then if you're like never allowing yourself to feel excited about the progress that you've made, or like celebrate the achievements that you've already made. So definitely, especially considering, you know, when you're either just focusing on achieving big goals or starting a company, you really have to figure out like where you're going to get the motivation to keep going. A lot of that motivation has to be sort of like internal. So, you know, where are you getting that internal motivation? A lot of the times it's through kind of celebrating these small steps and celebrating along the way, so that you can like continue to feel good about the process, so that you continue to be committed again to those like big end results.